Lieutenant Thea Reed had always found solace in her midnight runs through the Montana wilderness. The vast emptiness of the forest and the rhythm of her boots against the earth helped quiet the memories of her last deployment. Tonight was different. The air crackled with an unusual energy, and the wildlife had gone eerily silent. A brilliant flash of light streaked across the sky, followed by the unmistakable sound of something massive tearing through the atmosphere. Thea's military training kicked in as she tracked the object's trajectory, watching it disappear behind the tree line about 2 miles north. A dull thud reverberated through the ground, and a plume of smoke rose above the canopy. Her first instinct was to call it in. Protocol demanded reporting any unauthorized entry into U.S. airspace. But something held her back. The object's descent had been too controlled, too precise to be space debris or a meteor. After Afghanistan, she'd learned to trust her instincts. Thea changed direction, her pace quickening as she navigated the familiar terrain. The smoke led her to a small impact crater, where a sleek, opalescent pod lay partially buried in the earth. Its surface seemed to shift colors in the moonlight, displaying technology far beyond anything she'd seen in her years of service. A soft cry pierced the night, a sound that made her heart stop. It was the cry of a baby. The pod's exterior shimmered, and a section dissolved, revealing a woman cradling an infant. The stranger's silvery skin had an almost translucent quality, with delicate patterns that seemed to pulse with light. Her eyes, large and entirely violet, fixed on Thea with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Please," the woman whispered in perfect English, though her lips moved strangely around the word. "They'll kill her." Thea's hand moved instinctively to the gun at her hip but didn't draw it. The woman's arms tightened around her child, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she straightened her spine, ready to face whatever came next. "Who are you?" Thea asked, keeping her voice low and steady. "Who's trying to kill you?" "My name is Rhine." The woman's voice trembled. "My daughter is Nova. We fled when the Kraxan Empire began their purge. They're eliminating anyone with the ancient bloodline, anyone who could challenge their rule." She looked down at her child, who had quieted but still squirmed in her arms. "Nova is the last of our line. If they find her, everything we fought for dies with her." Thea knew she should report this. It was her duty as a soldier, her obligation as a citizen. First contact with an alien species would change everything. But looking at Rhine and Nova, she didn't see aliens, she saw refugees, survivors of a war they never chose. The sound of distant helicopters made the decision for her. "Can you walk?" Thea asked, already moving toward the pod. Rhine nodded, though her legs shook as she stepped onto Earth soil for the first time. Thea quickly assessed what they could salvage from the pod, a small bag of what appeared to be personal items, and some sort of technology that Rhine insisted they couldn't leave behind. "My cabin's about 3 miles from here," Thea said, taking the bag. "We need to move fast. Those choppers will be here soon, and they'll have thermal imaging." They moved through the forest as quickly as Rhine's condition allowed. The alien woman was clearly exhausted, but she never complained, focusing entirely on keeping her daughter quiet and protected. Thea led them through dense undergrowth, avoiding the clearer paths where they might be spotted. As they walked, Rhine explained more about their situation. The Kraxan Empire had ruled their galaxy for centuries, maintaining power through advanced technology and brutal suppression. But there were prophecies about a child who would be born with the ability to unlock the full potential of their species' psychic abilities, abilities the Empire had worked to suppress. When Nova was born, they knew, Rhine said, her voice barely a whisper. Her energy signature was different. Stronger. The Empire ordered immediate termination of all suspected bloodline carriers. "My husband," her voice caught. "He held them off while we escaped. I don't know if he survived." Thea's cabin came into view just as the helicopter's searchlights began sweeping the area around the crash site. She hurried Rhine and Nova inside, quickly closing the blackout curtains she'd installed during her worst PTSD episodes. "It's not much," Thea said, looking around at the sparse furnishings, "but it's secure. No one comes out here." Ryan sank onto the couch, finally allowing exhaustion to show on her face. Nova had fallen asleep, her tiny features peaceful despite everything they'd been through. In the cabin's light, Thea could see that the child's skin had a more pronounced silvery sheen than her mother's, and occasional sparks of energy seemed to dance across her surface. "Thank you," Ryan said, meeting Thea's eyes. "I know what you're risking by helping us. If they find out." "They won't," Thea interrupted, her voice firm. She'd made her decision the moment she heard Nova's cry. "I've spent enough time in war zones to know that sometimes, following orders means being on the wrong side of history." She moved to the window, watching the helicopters circle in the distance. Soon, they'd find the pod. Questions would be asked. Searches would be conducted. But out here, in the vast wilderness, 2 refugees might just have a chance to survive. As if sensing her thoughts, Nova stirred in her sleep, and a soft glow emanated from her skin, filling the cabin with a warm, peaceful light. Thea felt something she hadn't experienced since before her deployment: hope. "Get some rest," she told Ryan. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to keep you both safe." As Ryan finally allowed herself to drift off, Thea remained vigilant by the window. She knew that by choosing to help them, she'd just entered a war unlike anything she'd trained for. But looking at the sleeping child who might hold the key to overthrowing an empire, she knew it was worth it. The night grew deeper, and somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. Thea Reed, once a decorated lieutenant of the United States Army, now stood guard over a different kind of mission, protecting a child who carried the hopes of a civilization among the stars. The real challenge was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since the night that changed everything. Thea watched from her kitchen window as Ryan hung laundry in the backyard, her movements still carrying an otherworldly grace despite the mundane task. Nova lay in a makeshift cradle nearby, cooing at the butterflies that seemed unusually attracted to her presence. The transformation of her cabin had been subtle but profound. Ryan's alien technology had been carefully hidden beneath floorboards and inside walls. They'd converted the spare room into a nursery, and Thea had explained away her sudden interest in baby supplies to the general store owner as preparation for a visiting sister, a story that felt more natural with each telling. But it was Nova who had undergone the most remarkable changes. The infant's silvery skin had developed the ability to shift its appearance, allowing her to pass as human when necessary. Ryan explained it was an evolutionary adaptation their species had developed centuries ago, though she seemed surprised by how quickly Nova had mastered it. "Thea." Ryan's urgent whisper broke through her thoughts. "Something's happening with Nova." Thea rushed outside to find the baby surrounded by a sphere of shimmering energy. Small objects, leaves, twigs, even the laundry pins, orbited around her like a miniature solar system. Nova giggled, clearly delighted by her newfound ability. "She shouldn't be manifesting powers this early," Ryan said, her voice tight with worry. "The Empire monitors for energy signatures like this. We need to." A low rumble interrupted her. Both women looked up to see military aircraft cutting across the sky, flying much lower than usual. Thea recognized the distinctive shape of sensor arrays mounted beneath their wings. "Inside. Now." Thea helped Ryan gather Nova and the laundry, quickly ushering them into the cabin. The moment they crossed the threshold, Nova's energy field dissolved, sending the collected items clattering to the floor. Thea activated the signal jammers she'd borrowed from her old unit, hoping they would be enough to mask any residual energy readings. She'd been expecting something like this since she'd heard about the new atmospheric research station that had been hastily constructed near the original crash site. "We knew this day would come," Ryan said, gently rocking Nova. "Perhaps we should leave. Find somewhere more remote." "No," Thea interjected. "That's exactly what they'd expect. Moving now would only make us more visible. She pulled up satellite imagery on her laptop, showing the increased military presence in the region. Besides, they're not just looking for you anymore. Look at these patterns, these are search grids. They're hunting for something else. Ryan's expression darkened. The cracks in advanced scouts. They must have followed our trajectory. She touched a pattern on her arm, and a holographic display sprang to life, showing what appeared to be a star chart. If they're here, the Empire won't be far behind. A sharp knock at the door froze them both. Lieutenant Reed, a familiar voice called out. It's Colonel Marcus Bennett. We need to talk. Thea's mind raced. Bennett had been her commanding officer in Afghanistan, a good man who'd always looked out for his soldiers. But this situation was far beyond any military protocol. Get in the panic room, she whispered to Ryan, referring to the reinforced basement they'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Don't come out unless you hear the safe word. As Ryan and Nova disappeared below, Thea took a deep breath and opened the door. Colonel Bennett stood on her porch, alone but with a visible earpiece. His expression was grim. Sir, she said, falling back on military formality. This is unexpected. Cut the bullshit, Reed. Bennett's voice was low but intense. We've detected energy signatures matching the crash site debris. Signatures that somehow keep disappearing around your property. He held up a hand to stop her protest. I'm here off the record because I owe you. Whatever you're hiding, it's attracted attention way above my pay grade. 3-letter agencies are involved now, and they're not the only ones watching. A distant screech drew their attention skyward. Through a break in the clouds, Thea caught a glimpse of something that definitely wasn't human technology, a metallic shape that seemed to bend light around it. They're getting bolder, Bennett muttered. We've had 7 unauthorized entries into our atmosphere this week alone. He turned back to Thea, his expression softening slightly. I don't need to know what you're involved in. But whatever it is, be careful. There are forces at play here that could tear our world apart. After Bennett left, Thea remained by the window, watching until his vehicle disappeared down the forest road. Only then did she give the all-clear signal, bringing Ryan and Nova back up from the panic room. He suspects, Ryan said, not really a question. Yes. Thea began checking their emergency bags, making sure everything was ready if they needed to run. But he's also warning us. Things are escalating faster than we anticipated. Nova stirred in her mother's arms, and suddenly every electronic device in the cabin sparked to life. The laptop displayed complex mathematical equations that scrolled past too quickly to read. The radio cycled through frequencies, catching fragments of encrypted military communications. Her powers are growing, Ryan whispered, a mix of pride and fear in her voice. Soon, we won't be able to hide them. Thea watched as Nova reached toward the laptop, causing the equations to shift and reorganize themselves. Then we don't hide. We prepare. She turned to Ryan with determination. Your people have been running from the Empire for generations. Maybe it's time to make a stand, right here, on Earth. As if in response, Nova's skin began to glow, casting patterns on the walls that looked remarkably like star maps. Somewhere in those stars, an empire was coming for them. But they had something the Empire didn't expect, a child whose powers were evolving beyond anyone's predictions, and a planet full of humans who had centuries of experience fighting against overwhelming odds. The true war was about to begin, and Earth would be its battlefield. The first Kraxan hunter appeared on a Tuesday morning, wearing the skin of a human businessman. Thea spotted him at the general store, his movements too precise, his smile never reaching his eyes. He asked questions about recent atmospheric disturbances, showing particular interest in the forests surrounding her cabin. They're getting desperate, Ryan said when Thea reported back. 6 months had passed since their arrival, and Nova, now crawling, left trails of sparkles in her wake that were becoming harder to explain. The Empire doesn't send shadow skins unless they're certain of their target. Thea watched Nova manipulate a sphere of pure energy, shaping it into various forms. The child's powers had grown exponentially, far beyond what even Ryan had expected. How many hunters should we expect? 3 to 5 in the first wave. If they fail. Ryan's expression hardened. They'll send the harvesters. A sharp beeping interrupted them. The early warning system they'd crafted from a combination of Earth technology and Ryan's alien devices showed multiple signals approaching from orbit. Thea rushed to the monitoring station hidden in what used to be her tool shed. 7 signatures, she reported, studying the readouts. Small craft, probably scout ships. They're using a dispersed entry pattern to avoid military detection. She activated her secure phone, the one Bennett had slipped her during his last, unofficial, visit. I need to warn them. Lieutenant Reed, Bennett answered on the first ring. Please tell me you're not responsible for the anomalies we're tracking. Sir, you need to scramble interceptors to these coordinates. She quickly rattled off the entry points. Classify it as a training exercise. You'll want to keep this off official channels. A pause. Those coordinates match exactly with our readings. Reed, what have you gotten yourself into? The less you know, the better, sir. But trust me, if these ships reach their targets, a lot of civilians will die. The line went dead for a moment before Bennett's voice returned. Training exercise authorized. Good hunting, Lieutenant. Within minutes, the distant roar of fighter jets filled the air. Thea led Ryan and Nova to the panic room, which they'd reinforced with salvage technology from the escape pod. Through their sensors, they watched the aerial battle unfold. The Kraxan scouts were fast, but Earth's fighters had the advantage of numbers and home territory. 2 scout ships were immediately disabled by electromagnetic pulses, a defense Thea had suggested based on Ryan's intelligence about Kraxan technology. 3 more broke off their attack, retreating to high orbit. But 2 ships slipped through, their trajectory aimed directly at the forest. They'll start with the ground teams, Thea said, checking her modified weapons. The ammunition had been enhanced with elements from Nova's cradle, designed to penetrate Kraxan energy shields. Standard search pattern. They'll work their way through the forest, using their shadowskin infiltrators to gather intelligence. Ryan activated a holographic display, showing the positions of multiple heat signatures converging on their location. The hunters are already moving. They'll have sensors calibrated to Nova's energy signature. As if on cue, Nova created a complex geometric pattern in the air, her powers responding to the growing tension. The pattern expanded, filling the room with a soft, pulsing light. She's trying to help, Ryan whispered, watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. She understands more than we realize. Thea made a quick decision. We need to split up. They'll be expecting us to stay together. She pulled out a map marked with multiple rally points and escape routes. You take Nova through the tunnel system. I'll create a diversion, lead them toward the old mining complex. No, Ryan protested. The hunters will kill you. They can try. Thea checked her tactical gear one last time. But first, they have to catch me. And I know these woods better than anyone. A crash from above signaled that the hunters had reached the cabin. Nova, surprisingly, remained completely silent, her eyes focused and alert. The geometric pattern she'd created suddenly contracted, forming a protective barrier around her mother. She's never done that before, Ryan said, amazed. Your daughter's full of surprises. Thea handed Ryan a modified communicator. 24 hours. If I'm not at the rally point, take Nova and run. There are people who will help you, Bennett knows more than he lets on. Another crash, closer now. Thea could hear the hunters speaking in their native language, their voices carrying the metallic undertone that their human disguises couldn't quite mask. Go, Thea urged, readying her weapon. I'll buy you as much time as I can. Ryan hesitated for just a moment before pulling Thea into a fierce embrace. Stay alive, Lieutenant. She gathered Nova and slipped into the hidden tunnel, sealing the entrance behind them. Thea moved to her position, remembering her combat training, every lesson learned in Afghanistan. But this was different. This time, she wasn't fighting for a flag or a cause. She was fighting for a child who might change the course of two civilizations. The panic room door burst open. 3 hunters entered, their human disguises flickering from the energy weapons they carried. Thea smiled grimly as she raised her rifle. The hunt had begun, but the hunters were about to learn a hard lesson about underestimating humans. Nova's protective barrier still shimmered around her, and Thea felt a surge of confidence. Somewhere in the forest, a baby with the power to reshape reality was escaping with her mother. All Thea had to do was make sure they got far enough away to have a fighting chance. "Welcome to Earth," she whispered, and opened fire. The mountain clinic's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Nova's silvery skin, now pale and flickering like a dying star. Thea watched through the observation window as doctors huddled around the child's bed, their expressions growing more confused by the minute. Ryan stood beside her, wounds from their narrow escape still fresh, her hand pressed against the glass. 48 hours earlier, they'd been reunited at the rally point, Thea arriving with minutes to spare after leading the hunters into a carefully planned ambush. But their victory had been short-lived. Nova's powers had begun to destabilize, creating random bursts of energy that threatened to reveal their location to every Kraxan sensor in orbit. "Her core temperature is still rising," Dr. Rebecca Walsh reported, emerging from the isolation room. As the only civilian doctor Thea trusted with their secret, she'd been working non-stop to understand Nova's condition. "Whatever's happening, it's beyond anything in human medicine." "It's the separation," Ryan explained, her voice breaking. "Nova's powers are tied to our ancestral home crystal, the one I had to leave behind during our escape. Without it to help stabilize her abilities." She trailed off, watching another burst of energy ripple across her daughter's skin. A sudden commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Colonel Bennett appeared, his uniform disheveled, his face grim. "We've got incoming. Multiple bogies just breached atmosphere. Bigger than anything we've seen before." Thea checked the modified tablet showing Nova's energy readings. "They're tracking her power fluctuations. We need to." The hospital's lights flickered, and every electronic device within 50 feet of Nova's room suddenly activated. On the security monitors, they watched as phones, computers, and medical equipment throughout the building began displaying the same message, repeating in every human language. "Surrender the child or face planetary extinction." "They're here," Ryan whispered. "The harvesters." The ground shook as massive ships descended through the clouds, their hulls stretching for miles across the Montana sky. Smaller craft began deploying, their formations clearly military in nature. "How long?" Thea asked, already calculating escape routes. "Minutes, maybe less." Bennett was on his phone, barking orders. "I've got fighters scrambling, but against ships that size." Nova's scream cut through the air like a physical force. Medical equipment exploded as a wave of pure energy radiated from her small body. Through the observation window, they watched in horror as she began to float above her bed, surrounded by a cocoon of crackling power. "Her molecular structure is destabilizing," Dr. Walsh reported, checking readings that were increasingly off the scale. "At this rate, the energy release alone could level half the state." Ryan pressed her hands against the isolation room's shielding, and for a moment, mother and daughter's eyes met. Nova's were now pure light, burning with the intensity of newborn stars. "There's only one way to save her." Ryan turned to Thea, her expression resolute. "We need to get back to the crash site. Now." "The pod was stripped clean months ago," Bennett objected. "Government teams went over every inch." "Not the pod." Ryan pulled up a holographic map, showing a location half a mile from the original crash. I ejected the home crystal before impact. If we can reach it, I can stabilize Nova's powers before they tear her apart. Another explosion rocked the building as Nova's energy cocoon pulsed. Through the windows, they could see cracks and drop ships beginning to land in the hospital parking lot. Even if we get to the crystal, Thea said, checking her weapons, we'll be leading them right to it. We'll be giving them exactly what they want. No. Ryan's eyes held a fierce determination. We'll be leading them into a trap. Nova's powers are beyond anything they've predicted. If we can stabilize her at the moment they attack. She left the implications unspoken. Bennett looked between them, then at the approaching alien forces. I can give you 10 minutes. After that, I have orders to implement the Scorched Earth Protocol. This situation just went beyond any one child. That's all we'll need. Thea turned to Dr. Walsh. Can you move her? The doctor nodded to the portable containment unit they'd prepared. It won't hold her for long, but it should get you there. As they began the dangerous process of transferring Nova, Thea caught Ryan's arm. You know this is exactly what they want. They'll throw everything they have at us. Good. Ryan's smile was fierce. Because they have no idea what Nova can do when she's fighting for the people she loves. The hospital's backup generators failed as Nova's power continued to surge. In the darkness, her glowing form illuminated their grim faces. Through the chaos of evacuation alarms and approaching enemy forces, Thea remembered the night she'd first heard a baby crying in the Montana wilderness. She'd made a choice then, to protect a child who carried the hopes of a civilization. Now, as humanity's first war against an alien empire began in earnest, she realized that choice had always been leading to this moment. They had one shot to save Nova, and with her, perhaps both their worlds. The Kraxan Empire was about to learn why you should never corner a human protecting their family, even if that family came from the stars. The forest burned around them as they raced toward the crystal's location. Nova's containment unit pulsed with increasingly violent bursts of energy, each one leaving scorch marks on the reinforced metal. Behind them, Kraxan drop ships filled the sky, their weapons turning the Montana wilderness into an inferno. Through here. Ryan led them down a ravine, her memories of that first desperate night guiding their way. Thea and Bennett followed, providing covering fire as Harvester ground troops closed in. Their modified weapons tore through the aliens' energy shields, but for every hunter they dropped, 3 more took its place. Nova's powers suddenly flared, shorting out their communication devices and causing the containment unit to crack. Through the fractures, Thea caught glimpses of the child, Nova's form now more energy than matter, her small body struggling to contain forces that could reshape reality itself. She's trying to tell us something, Ryan said, placing her hand near the containment unit. Immediately, her eyes blazed with the same light as her daughter's. The crystal, it's calling to her. A massive explosion rocked the ravine as the harvesters deployed their heavy artillery. Bennett took a hit to his shoulder but kept moving. Whatever we're going to do, it needs to happen fast. The Air Force can't hold them back much longer. They emerged from the ravine into a small clearing. At its center, barely visible beneath years of growth, a faint purple glow pulsed in sync with Nova's energy surges. Ryan rushed forward, her hands moving in complex patterns as she began unearthing the crystal. Incoming. Thea's warning came as the first wave of elite Kraxan warriors teleported into the clearing. These weren't the scout hunters they'd fought before, these were the Empire's legendary Shadow Guard, their armor flowing like liquid metal, their weapons capable of reducing planets to ash. Surrender the child, their leader commanded, voice resonating with unnatural harmonics. The Empire's sentence will be carried out. Like hell. Thea and Bennett opened fire, their enhanced weapons finding gaps in the Shadow Guard's defenses. But the elite warriors were devastatingly efficient, their return fire forcing the humans to dive for cover. Nova's containment unit finally shattered, unable to contain her powers any longer. The child rose into the air, her form a miniature sun of pure energy. The Shadow Guard raised their weapons, but Rhine had reached the crystal. The moment her hands touched it, a connection formed between mother, daughter, and the ancient artifact. Now! Rhine shouted, her voice carrying harmonics that matched her daughter's power signature. Nova, remember what I taught you. Remember who you are. Nova's eyes opened, blazing with light that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. I remember. The crystal exploded upward, growing into a lattice of pure energy that surrounded them. The Shadow Guard's weapons fired, but their energy bolts were absorbed into Nova's expanding power field. Above them, the massive harvester ships began charging their primary weapons. They're going to glass the entire area, Bennett warned, checking his tactical display. Counting down to planetary bombardment. But Rhine was smiling. No. They're giving Nova exactly what she needs. The first harvester blast struck Nova's energy field, and vanished. The second and third followed, each one absorbed into the growing maelstrom of power surrounding the child. Nova raised her small hands, and suddenly every piece of Kraxan technology in range simply stopped working. Ships fell from the sky as their anti-gravity systems failed. Shadow Guard armor became inert metal, trapping the elite warriors. Even their quantum communications array went dark, cutting off their connection to the Empire's fleet. Impossible, the Shadow Guard leader gasped, his harmonics failing. She's accessing the old powers. The ones we sealed away. The ones you tried to destroy, Rhine corrected. But you forgot, evolution doesn't stop just because you fear it. Nova isn't just accessing the old powers. She's transcended them. Nova descended to the ground, her power field stabilizing into a permanent aurora that danced across her skin. She walked to her mother, took her hand, and together they approached the fallen Shadow Guard. Tell your Empire this, Nova said, her voice carrying both the innocence of a child and the wisdom of ages. Earth is under my protection now. If you return, if you threaten any world under my watch, I won't simply disable your weapons. I will undo everything you've built. Your empire will never have existed at all. The Shadow Guard's leader stared at the child who had single-handedly defeated their most powerful weapons. For the first time in recorded history, a Kraxan warrior bowed in surrender. The battle was over. As Earth's military secured the area and Bennett began the monumental task of explaining everything to his superiors, Thea watched Rhine and Nova examining the crystal together. The child's powers were stable now, controlled but still growing. What will you do now? Thea asked them. Nova looked up at her, smiling. The stars themselves seemed to dance in her eyes. We'll protect them. All of them. The Empire isn't the only threat out there, and Earth needs to be ready. We'll need help, Rhine added, taking Thea's hand. Someone who understands both worlds. Someone who was willing to risk everything to protect a child she'd never met. Thea looked at the family she'd chosen that night in the forest, an alien refugee, a child with the power to reshape reality, and the weight of two civilizations' futures resting on their shoulders. Well, she said, grinning, I hear Montana's beautiful this time of year. Above them, the stars twinkled with new possibility. The war was over, but their story, Earth's story, was just beginning. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, word was spreading, a new power had risen, born from the love between two worlds, protected by those who dared to choose compassion over duty. The Kraxan Empire had sought to prevent a prophecy. Instead, they had fulfilled it. And in a small clearing in the Montana wilderness, a human soldier, an alien refugee, and a child who bridged both their worlds began planning for tomorrow.